Good evening, and welcome to today's telephone town hall. My name is Colin Cochran. I'll be your moderator this evening. And tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time, good evening. My name is Colin Cochran, and I'm your moderator this evening, and welcome to today's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 on the call. On the agenda for tonight's call, we'll be discussing Measure 92 and how it will impact us as consumers, how it will impact Oregon family farmers, how it will impact Oregon businesses, and how it will impact us all. If you have a question at any time, please press 0. Again, my name is Colin Cochran. I'll be your moderator for tonight's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0. On the agenda for tonight's call, we'll be discussing Measure 92, how it impacts us as Oregon consumers, how it impacts Oregon family farmers, and how it impacts us all as Oregonians. We have two amazing speakers with us tonight. The first is registered dietitian and nutritionist Ruth Carey. She has more than 35 years in food science and nutrition, and she has been helping consumers, families, and sports teams choose the right food for their health and well-being for, again, 35 years. Ruth is also a mother and a new grandmother. Hello, Ruth.
Hello. It's nice to join you, and thank you all for listening in this evening. As a registered dietitian and nutritionist with years of experience, I have several concerns with ballot Measure 92. The first one is that Measure 92 will provide misleading information to consumers. It won't really tell consumers which ingredients in food are GMO or what percentage of a product is GMO. And many foods will be exempt from this bill. My second concern is increased cost to consumers. As a dietitian working with clients, I know food cost is an issue, and Oregon is a state with a great need for food security. And with increased cost of food under this measure, consumers will get no benefit for either nutritional value or food safety. And my third concern is that this ballot measure conflicts with existing nationwide food labeling. Federal labeling already exists for those who would like to purchase GMO-free foods, and those labels are the organic label and the non-GMO label. So I look forward to discussing this ballot measure with you tonight and answering your questions.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you again for everybody who's joining us. Again, my name is Colin. I'll be your moderator this evening, and welcome to today's telephone town hall. Tonight, we are discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 on the call. Again, on the agenda for tonight's call, we're going to be discussing Measure 92 and its impact on us as Oregon consumers, its impact on Oregon family farmers and businesses as well. Again, anytime you may have a question, please press 0 on the call. Our second speaker tonight is Dana Bieber. Dana Bieber is a consultant to the NOAA 92 Coalition and has studied the public policy impacts of mandatory single-state labeling law proposals such as Measure 92. Ms. Bieber has presented information related to the science behind GMOs, cost impacts of mandatory labeling proposals, the accuracy and reliability of the information provided by such labels, and the indirect economic impacts for farmers, food producers, taxpayers, and consumers. Hello, Dana.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening for an important discussion on Measure 92. As you just heard Ruth talking about the fundamental flaws of the measure, really that it simply doesn't provide consumers reliable and accurate information about the ingredients in their food, and yet it's very costly. You know, it's not just costly to consumers, it's costly to taxpayers as well, because under Measure 92, two new state agencies are going to have to be responsible for testing and monitoring at thousands of farms across the state and tens of thousands of food products in thousands of stores. All that's going to be costly to taxpayers. There is no funding source identified for the enforcement, nor is there any limit to taxpayer money that can be spent on this. So it's costly to consumers and taxpayers. But, Measure 92 really creates a significant burden for Oregon family farmers. Under this measure, the farmers would be required to have completely separate systems for growing and processing both their GMO crops and their non-GMO crops. It essentially means two separate sets of equipment for every farmer growing these crops. The same is true for food processors around the state. They will have to have two different processing facilities, one for GMO foods and one for non-GMO foods, and the segregation continues all the way to the distribution warehouse. This is costly and onerous on Oregon family farmers and food companies, and that's why our coalition has come together to urge a no vote. And Ruth and I are very happy to be here with you this evening and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dana, and we're going to get right into your questions. Again, a reminder, if you have questions at all during today's call, please press 0. Our first question is from Charlotte from Portland, and Charlotte has a question about the scientific factor. Charlotte, go right ahead.
Yes, having been raised by agriculture people in the scientific part of the world, I'm concerned about what this is doing to us as an individual and how to vote and what is the possibilities of danger or costs. I don't understand, I guess. Thank you.
Hey, Charlotte, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question about that. These GMO foods, these are the foods that we've been putting on our family dinner tables for over 20 years now. There have literally been billions of people who have eaten trillions of meals of GMO foods. And, they are the most extensively tested food in our entire food system. Every major scientific and medical organization from around the world has looked at these foods and studied them. Organizations such as the American Medical Association, the National Academy of Sciences, the World Health Organization, and the list goes on and on. And what these scientific studies always conclude is the same thing, that they are not only are the foods safe, they're actually identical to their non-GMO foods. So there's been significant scientific research that have been done on these food crops that we've been eating for all these years. But at the same time, Charlotte, I recognize that there are going to be some consumers, for whatever reason, who prefer to choose foods without GMO ingredients in them. And for those consumers, they can look for either the organic or non-GMO label. Both of those are reliable and accurate and don't have all the misleading information and special exemptions that are contained in Measure 92.
And Charlotte, this is Bruce. I would just like to add that as a dietitian and nutritionist and a mother, I can assure you that the nutritional value of foods that are GMO and non-GMO are exactly the same. And so that's one of my concerns about this measure, is I'm afraid that people will be worried with a label that is misleading.
Thank you. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome to today's Town Hall on Measure 92. If you have a question on anything at any time, please press 0. We actually are going to pose a question to you. Throughout this phone call, we're going to be asking you a series of questions that you could respond to on your telephone. Our first question is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon farmers? Press 1 if you'll encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Measure 92. Press 4 if you'll do all of the above. Again, I'll run down those again. What actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon farmers? Press 1 if you'll encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Measure 92. Press 4 if you'll do all of the above. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome to the Measure 92 Town Hall. Please press 0 if you have a question for our two great speakers this evening. Our next question is going to be Gary in Portland. Hello, Gary. You have a question about why 92 is necessary.
Yes, why is 92 necessary? Why not go with the status quo, which has worked quite effectively the last, couple of decades? And I am a victim of Agent Orange. So I have an interest in this question. as do a lot of my brothers and sisters that are dying of that stuff. But labeling is not going to help. People lie on labels.
Gary, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. Thank you very much for asking it. You know, I really appreciate where you're coming from and where where your background is and where you've come to on this issue. So I appreciate that. You know, you asked about why this measure is necessary, and I think that's really one of the fundamental flaws of Measure 92 is because it's simply not necessary. You know, right now there are consumers, like we were talking about a little earlier, who do prefer to purchase foods without GMO ingredients in them. They can already do so by looking for the organic or the non-GMO label. The fundamental problem with Measure 92 is that it is so poorly written and there's so many special exemptions and loopholes, it doesn't tell consumers about whether their food contains GMO ingredients or not. In fact, 2/3 of the food that's even sold in the state gets a special exemption, and it won't be covered under Measure 92. It's just a costly measure with all costs and no benefits, and that's why we think it deserves a no vote.
Great. Again, if you're just joining us, please press 0 if you have a question at any time. Our next question is from Emily in Dallas. Emily, you have a question about the costs of a potential passage of Measure 92.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm one of those folks who believes that more information about our food and its environmental impacts is always better. And I do realize that the call is being funded by the No on 92 campaign. But what I'm concerned about is the unsubstantiated claims that I've seen in the advertisements that voting yes on 92 is going to cost consumers more. Can you tell me some credible sources that I could go to that would confirm that allegation?
Sure, Emily. I would love to answer that question for you. This is Ruth. And like you and most of my clients, we do want to know what's in our food. And right now we have labeling that if people don't want to have GMOs, they can find the label that says organic or no GMO. And as you probably know if you go to the grocery store, that those foods cost a little bit more, and there's a reason for that. And with this measure, the cost will go all across the board. The farmer will have costs. The food processor will have costs for a label that's just specially for Oregon. And then those costs are going to be passed on to the consumer. There was a study done by a Cornell University professor who estimated the cost would be up to $400 per family per year. And I'm sure it really depends on the size of the family and the family budget. But I do have concerns since Oregon is a state that has a great deal of food insecurity, and I know that cost is an issue for my clients.
And Emily, I'd also be happy to get in on this too, because I'm a cost-sensitive shopper myself. So the cost of food really matters to my family as well. So when we talk about the cost of this, you know, there's been other states that have looked at these single-state labeling initiatives, and they've been rejected by voters in all the states they've been in. But there have been studies that have been done, and Ruth just mentioned one of them, but they look at the cost of this, and it's about $400 a year for the average family of 4. But it's not just those studies. It's also the State of Oregon Legislative Revenue Office. They issued a memo on this to the Financial Estimate Committee, and even the Legislative Revenue Office said that will lead to higher overall consumer prices for groceries. And that's because food producers just for the state of Oregon will have to specially make their products with higher priced non-GMO ingredients in order to avoid putting on a misleading and inaccurate label. And that, along with the segregation that's required under Measure 92, that's where the costs come to consumers at the grocery store.
Great. Our next question is from Carol from Sherwood. Carol, you have a question about the folks behind Measure 92, and Carol's also a farm wife for 25 years. Carol, how are you tonight?
I'm just fine, thank you. I'd like to know where the money's coming from that's proposing this bill. Who are they? Who's backing it? And I'd like you to name names. I have lived in Washington County all my life, and I've eaten the hazelnuts, the blueberries, the raspberries, the wheat. all the products that we grow and what makes Washington County thrive. And for someone to come in and say that this is killing us is just wrong. And I want to say I'm alive and kicking. So who's doing this to us?
Hey, Carol, this is Dana. I'm happy to answer your question. This is you make a really good point of where is this coming from? I hate to tell you, this is a recycled initiative, and as you probably remember, Carol, this was before Oregon voters a few years back, and it was rejected. And it's this same out-of-state group that's bringing it back around again. It's companies like Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, for example, and Mercola, which is, he's a kind of a questionable advocate against cancer treatments and questions vaccines for kids, and he's got a company, and that's one of the main funders of this effort. So after Oregon voters rejected it a few years ago, that same group of people took it to California, and those voters rejected it, took it to Washington last year. Washington voters rejected it, and right back here at Oregon, it's the same flawed measure brought to us by the same group of people. So that's how we got to where we are today. It was a bad initiative last time. It was before Oregon voters, and it remains the same today, and that's why we believe it deserves a no vote.
In Portland, Kim has a question. Hello, Kim?
Hello?
Hi, Kim.
Hello?
Yeah, Kim, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Hello, Kim. Go right ahead.
I think it should stay the same. A yes vote would put us at a disadvantage, and it would hurt the economy. Now, if every state did it, that might be a little different. But if only we do it, that leaves us at quite a disadvantage, I think, and it would be costly. It would hurt the economy.
Kim, you're exactly right. That's where we get to the problem with this. I mean, because this is an Oregon-only proposal, so you got to think about it. The food that's sold in Washington can't be sold in Oregon. The box of cereal that's sold in Idaho can't be sold in Oregon. So the real cost, what they come from, is this segregation. It starts at the farmer level. They've got to segregate every part of their crop. Then it goes to a food producer. They've got to have two separate lines for GMO foods and non-GMO foods that they're going to produce. Then it goes to a distribution warehouse, and there's the two distribution warehouses in the state in Portland and one in Ontario. Well, they serve a number of different states, but yet they'll have to be segregated there. Food that can be sold in Oregon and food that's sold in the surrounding states. That's where the real cost comes in for consumers. It puts Oregon at a hugely competitive disadvantage. And instead, really all farmers and food producers and consumers should be treated equally. And the way that happens is food labeling standards should be set at the federal level.
The next question is from Cynthia in Corvallis. Cynthia, you have a question about what the difference in labeling is going to be.
Yes. What will be the difference between the labels on foods if this measure passes versus what we already have now?
Well, Cynthia, it would be misleading, right, the way it would be under ballot measure 92. Right now, we have federal labeling guidelines that if a food does not contain GMO, it's labeled either organic or it's labeled non-GMO. Under measure 92, we would have to put a label on foods either on the front or the back of the label prominently in a very misleading way saying may contain GMO or contains GMO ingredients. And my worry as a dietitian is that's going to scare consumers and have them think that this food doesn't have the same nutritional value when in fact that it does. So, that would be the difference. And we, as Dana just mentioned, the federal labeling guidelines work. Those that want to have GMO-free food can find them with over 20,000 foods that are currently under those two labels, organic or non-GMO, in the grocery store.
Great. And we are actually going to run our second poll question. And the language is, or the question is this. Again, what what
The second polling question that we wanted to ask is, what concerns you the most about Measure 92? Is it press number 1 if it's about the cost, the impacts on local farmers? Press number 2 if you're concerned about increasing grocery costs. Press number 3 if you're concerned about misleading labels. Or press number 4 if it's all of the above. So again, what concerns you the most about Measure 92? Number 1, if it's concerned about the impact on local farmers. Number 2, if you're concerned about the increased grocery costs. Press number 3 if you're concerned about misleading labels. And press number 4 if you're concerned about all of the above. So I think we're going to go ahead and take our next question. So that question is going to come from Jacob in Hood River. Welcome, Jacob. You have a question for us?
Yes, I'm curious to know what research we have gained over the past few years that thinks that we can put this on the ballot and succeed now after previously failing.
Hey, Jacob, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. You know, as you said, as you kind of alluded to, this has been back before Oregon voters in the past, and it's just been a recycled initiative that was failed in Oregon, it failed in California, it failed in Washington, and now it's back to Oregon. And the fundamental problem with it is the same. It's that it simply doesn't tell consumers if their food contains GMO ingredients or not. In fact, it provides misleading and inaccurate information to consumers, and it conflicts with the federal labeling standards we currently have for non-GMO foods. So it doesn't provide any reliable information to consumers, but yet it will increase the cost of groceries for all Oregon families, and that's why we are urging a no vote. It was a bad decision the last time it was before Oregon voters, and it's still a bad measure.
Great. And the next question is actually from David in Springfield. David, you have a question about why it hasn't been brought up, that a general question about genetic modification. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, my question is kind of simple in one way. I'm voting no on it, I can tell you that now. But I'd like to know why it hasn't been put out more that almost everything we eat nowadays in the supermarket, tomatoes, corn, products, anything, has been genetically modified from its original form. And especially like tomatoes, because, you know, they say they have organic tomatoes, but they don't look like the tomatoes of 300 years ago. They have been modified. They have been bred. That's genetically modifying. What they're really trying to pass is a thing, I guess, trying to find out what type of pesticides and fertilizers you use or whatever. And, you know, why hasn't that been brought out more? Because their organic stuff really is not organic.
Well, David, you know, it's interesting that what you brought up, and thank you so much for your no vote. I have to agree with you. And you know, you're right. Foods have been modified in some way over the years, either by nature or most recently by genetic engineering. And what we know is that you know, tomatoes are not one of the GMO foods, but foods, whether they're GMO or not, have the same nutritional value, and they're all very safe, and they provide great nutritional value to our diet. So I appreciate your no vote and understanding that whether it's been cross hybridization or crossbreeding, GMO nutritional value is all the same.
Right. Our next question is from Tiffany, who has a question about the exemptions and loopholes of Measure 92. Tiffany?
Yeah, so my question is simply that what or hearing about it on the advertisements on TV, and you guys have mentioned it a couple of times here, so I'm curious what those exemptions and loopholes are.
Hey, Tiffany, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. You know, one of the very first things, which is absolutely mind-boggling, when the proponents wrote Measure 92, the first thing they did is they exempted 2/3 of food and beverage that's even sold in the state. So the vast majority of food isn't even covered under Measure 92. And that's going to include foods, for example, all meat and dairy products that come from animals that were fed GMO grains and injected with GE medications, well, they all get a special exemption and they wouldn't be labeled. That's completely misleading to consumers. At the same time, it depends whether things are labeled, even if they contain GMO ingredients. It really depends where you buy them. You know, if you buy a can of pop and a bag of chips at a local deli, that doesn't have to have a label on it. But if you buy the exact same can of pop and you have to have an exact same bag of chips at a grocery store, it does have to have a label on it. So it's a special exemption by where you buy them. And at the same time, it's so poorly written that actually some foods that don't contain any GMO ingredients in them would have to be labeled as such. Those would be any products, for example, that contain just a bit of sugar or cornstarch or soybean oil. There's no GMO in that final product, even if it came from a genetically engineered plant, but yet it would have to be labeled as such. That's just inaccurate information to consumers. And so that's where Measure 92 fails on its fundamental promise to provide information to consumers, and instead it provides misinformation. And that's why we're having a discussion about it tonight, and our coalition has come together to urge a no vote.
Our next question is from Joel, who has a question about how this bill will import foods that are imported and exported to Oregon. Go ahead, Joel.
That was my main question. Is I want to know how this bill affects foods that are imported and exported into and out of the state with the labeling process, because I know we get food from California, and I know we send food to other states as well.
Hey, Joel, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question. Where Measure 92 impacts the food that's imported into the state. So any food that's sold in the state of Oregon, whether it's made in Oregon or it's just made in another state and sent to Oregon, it has to have a special label on it, or it has to be remade just for the state of Oregon with higher-priced non-GMO ingredients. So that's where we really get into the distribution problems under this measure, because all food that comes in to the state has to be specially handled just for the state of Oregon. So the box of granola bars that's sold in Washington cannot be the same box of granola bars that's sold in Oregon. So what that means is everything from the farmer to the food producer to the distribution center has to segregate the food just for the state of Oregon. That's what drives up the cost of that of hundreds of dollars a year, since it's a single state labeling policy. Instead, these labeling policies should be set at the federal level like they are now, so that every farmer, food producer, and consumer can be treated equally.
Great. Our next question comes from Bob in Tigard. Bob, go ahead with your question. Hello, Bob.
All right, Bob. I had a question, but now that I've listened to this town meeting, you get a no vote from me and my wife. My hat's off to you people for fighting hard for it. It just seemed to me like our government should have something better issues to be dealing with than this. That's you got my no vote. That's all I got.
Well, hey, Bob, this is Dana. Thanks so much for your no vote, and I'm glad that we had a chance to have this discussion tonight, because, one thing we found is the more that people have the facts about Measure 92, and the more they know about it, the less they like it when they realize it's not giving them reliable information, but yet it is going to increase the cost of food, it's going to increase the cost to taxpayers, and it hurts Oregon farmers. So thank you, Bob. Appreciate your support.
Our next question is from Alan. Alan has a question about the benefits of genetic engineering. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, my first thought was on GMOs and how it saves us, but first I'd like to comment on Agent Orange. There was a previous caller that said about Agent Orange. Agent Orange was originally 2,4,5-T, and they blame, the advertisements blame it on the people that invented it. Anyway, 2,4,5-T was a great herbicide. It was labeled to be used on pasture land for grazing cattle and for rice for control of weeds. After that, it was used quite a bit in Vietnam, which I'm a veteran there, and people got a little greedy and they started cooking a little quicker and a little hotter and created more dioxins, which was probably not the right idea, but it wasn't by the people that designed and invented it. However, it did save a lot of lives there. But after my statement, what I'm saying is we talk about GMOs. And so what my question is it's a genetic modified organism. So what is the polio vaccine? What is the flu shot? What have scientists done to take organisms to modify them to turn them into vaccines that prolong or save our lives. We've got this big Ebola scare now, and if people come along and say you can't genetically modify that to save people's lives, then I'm a no vote.
Good point.
Alan, this is Dana. You're exactly right. First of all, you raised a number of good issues there, and so first I want to start with thanking you for your service that you've provided, and then clearly you've done a tremendous amount of homework on this issue, and you understand it about what GMOs really are. But yes, they are. It's the same technology that creates insulin, and it helps provide medical cures. So there are definitely the benefits for it, and farmers in the state of Oregon, they simply want the option to use GMO crops if it's the right thing for them. Because what farmers will tell you is that using GMO crops, it gives them higher yields on their land. They use less water, they use less herbicides, and they're also using their farm equipment less because they're using less acreage to get their yield. So it's a really successful tool for Oregon family farmers. That's why they have joined our coalition and are urging a no vote, and they want the option to be able to use these crops if it's right for them. So thank you very much for your support of the No Coalition. Appreciate it.
Great, and I want to remind folks who are on the call that they can ask any question by pressing 0. Please press 0 if you have any question for either of our two speakers. Our next question is from Dwayne in Western Oregon. Dwayne has a question about how genetic engineering compares to other sorts of farming techniques. Dwayne?
Yeah, I was wondering about GMO versus wheat, changing the wheat to upgrade it. What about Marionberry? Marionberry was a cross between a young berry and a boysenberry. Is that genetically then? Genetic changed? That was done years ago. Wheat and barley has done about the same thing.
Well, Dwayne, you're absolutely right. We've been modifying crops for thousands of years. We've all been eating them for many, many years. And we get lots of nutritional benefits, lots of variety of nutrients in our diet, and lots of healthful foods because of this. And so GMO is only different in the technology has become much more specific, and they can, in a much quicker timeline, do what it took years for cross-pollination to do. But the beauty of it is we do have crops that provide a lot of nutritional benefit to our diet, and that's why I'm really urging a no vote on Measure 92. I don't want people to be misled by labeling that does not tell consumers really what is in their food and has a potential to cause fears.
Right. Our next question comes from Neola from Portland. Go ahead with your question, Neola.
First, I don't have any kind of food allergies or problems. I do have friends who do, however. This is a two-part question. Are there really 64 countries who already have GMO labeling? And the second part to that is, if this is true, why wasn't the United States a leader in doing this?
Hi, Neola. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question. Yes, there are other countries that do require some sort of labeling of GMO foods, but actually, Measure 92 and those regulations are entirely different. For example, there's a zero tolerance that's required under Measure 92. Other countries have a variance of up to 5% of GMO products. Secondly, Measure 92 doesn't tell consumers which ingredient in their food is GMO. For example, in the EU, that is required. But, one of the fundamental problems with this is that, we're talking now about other countries, and with Measure 92, it's 1/50th of a country. And that's where the problem stems, is because just for the state of Oregon, the food would have to be specially handled and segregated, that increased cost. Instead, all farmers and food producers and consumers should be treated equally. And the way to achieve that is to set the labeling standards at the federal level, like we've already done for the two nationwide GMO labels. Consumers can look for the organic or non-GMO. Both of those are reliable and accurate and will tell consumers if there is GMO, will inform consumers that there's no GMO in their food. Measure 92, it simply doesn't provide that information, and that's why we believe it deserves a no vote.
Great, and we are going to ask our third poll question. And the question is this, again, you can answer using your telephone. Most people will receive their ballots in the coming days. When do you plan to fill out your ballot to vote no on 92 and send it in? Please press 1 if you'll fill it out and send it in this week. Please press 2 if you'll send it in next week. Please press 3 if you'll send it in right before the election. Again, most people will receive their ballots in the coming days. When do you plan to fill out your ballot to vote no on 92 and send it in? Please press 1 if you'll fill it out and send it in this week. Please press 2 if you'll send it in next week. Please press 3 if you'll send it in right before the election. So as you are doing that, we're going to take a question from Pete in Salem, who has some concerns about regulation costs. Please go ahead, Pete.
Yes, my concern is more of a commentary than it is a question. We will have more state regulation and overseeing the program, and we will have a tremendous amount of laboratory experiment to make sure that it's correct, which are both open-ended tax problems.
Yeah, Pete, you're exactly right. We've been talking about the cost to consumers, but there's a real cost to taxpayers, too. Because what happens under Measure 92, there's not one, but two different state agencies that are going to be responsible for writing hundreds of pages of regulations and enforcing Measure 92. And what that means that they'll have to do is they will have to test and monitor and inspect thousands of farms and tens of thousands of food products in thousands of stores across the state to ensure compliance. And there is no funding source identified for this, so it will already come out of existing revenues, and there's no limit to taxpayer money that can be spent on enforcing this measure. The Department of Administrative Services took an in-depth analysis of this, and they concluded that it's going to cost about $14 million every budget cycle to enforce Measure 92. This is an all-costs and no-benefits measure, and that's why we believe it deserves a no vote.
Our next question is from Sandra in Milwaukee. And Sandra has a question about the difference between GMO and natural. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yes, I was raised in the Junction City area where there was a great, wonderful farming community, and I'm just wondering, and as I said, I've lived here all my life, and I'm quite elderly, and I'm healthy, and I wondered what's the difference between GMO and the ones that aren't.
Hi, Sandra. I would be happy to answer that question for you. I can tell you that GMOs are some of the most highly regulated food, and we have a clear definition of genetically modified or genetically engineered foods where one gene has been changed to typically better the crop or better the nutritional value of a product. Natural is a label that's really very unregulated and can mean many things. So natural foods could actually be GMO or non-GMO.
Great. And I'm going to pose a question to our two speakers. Why do so many farmers oppose Measure 92?
Colin, this is Dana. I'll go ahead and answer that question. Farmers from across the state are urging a no vote on Measure 92. Every major agricultural organization is urging a no vote, and that's because this hurts Oregon family farmers. We've talked about all the separation that's required and how they have to have two sets of equipment for GMO and non-GMO, but that's not the only reason. Under Measure 92, farmers, particularly the small family farmers, can be sued for any alleged violation of Measure 92. For example, those are farmers who may be selling their products at a farmer's market or a roadside stand, or perhaps, as we see a lot in Oregon, there's farmers who also make food products as well, specialty added food products. They are held liable under Measure 92 for any sort of mistake in wording on a label. That's one of the many reasons that farmers are urging a no vote.
Great. And our next question is from Grace in Portland. She has a question about, besides the things that you just touched on, Dana, about the impact of cost to farmers, what other objections are there to Measure 92? Go ahead, Grace.
Well, I think a little bit of it has just been answered, but other than the fact that it may cost more money for farmers, what other, if any, objections do the farmers have? And you more or less answered a little bit of that just now. But are there what other reasons would farmers not want this to go through?
Well, hi, Grace. This is Dana. Aside from the complete segregation of everything and then the liability that they face, it also limits farmers' opportunities for future crop advancements. Farmers have a lot to deal with. They've got to deal with the weather and all those kinds of things to sustain their farm. But Oregon family farmers want to continue to have options for other crops, and Measure 92 makes it nearly impossible for them to do that, because if they want to eventually grow a GMO crop, they will have to fall under this enormous regulatory burden and all the costs and litigation that's behind it. And that's why you see, the Oregon Farm Bureau, the Oregon Women for Agriculture, local farm bureaus from across the state all joining this coalition to urge a no vote.
Great, and we are going to take one more question this evening, and it's from Sharon in Portland. And Sharon, you have a question about the supporters. Go right ahead.
Yes, I do. I'm confused about the ad I've seen that shows a man presumably from Consumer Reports. I'm wondering, they're supposed to be highly respected and unbiased, but they're supporting this Measure 92, and if they are from Consumer Reports, why would they be supporting this if it wasn't beneficial to somebody?
Hi, Sharon. This is Dana. I'll be happy to answer that question for you. Consumer Reports, it's Consumer Reports Union who has jumped into this, and they have an agenda here, quite frankly, and they are completely biased on this issue, because if they were looking at the facts and if they looked at this and they said, does this measure provide consumers accurate and reliable information? Clearly it doesn't. When you exempt 2/3 of the food in the state that's sold, including food that contains and was made with GMO ingredients, gets a special exemption, and that's not labeled. That's misleading and inaccurate. Same time, it requires foods that don't contain any GMO, but yet they have to be labeled because of the way this poorly written initiative was crafted. So it really fails consumers. It does not provide them the information that they want. And, Consumer Reports is some out-of-state company that's engaged in this, but let's take a closer look at it. The state-sanctioned Citizens Initiative Review Panel took a very close look at Measure 92. In fact, they spent 4 days studying this measure, and it's 20 people from around the state, independent voters from around the state. They analyzed it. They heard from people on the pro side and the con side, and they read a tremendous amount about Measure 92. And what they concluded is that Measure 92 deserves a no vote. And they said that in part because it provides inaccurate and misleading labels, it's burdensome to family farmers, and it's costly to consumers.
Great, and that's going to conclude our telephone town hall. Ruth and Dana, we'll start with you, Dana. Final thoughts.
Thank you, everyone, for spending this evening with us to have an important discussion on Measure 92. And I hope we were able to answer as many questions that we could squeeze in. So thank you for spending the time with us. And we just ask that you really get the facts about this measure, because the more we think people know about it and how misleading and inaccurate the labels are and how costly, the more they won't like this. And that's why our coalition has come together to urge a no vote.
And again, I would like to thank you for listening tonight and just remind you that we already have existing labeling standards that provide a reliable way for those who want to choose non-GMO to do that. And we don't need another statewide labeling regulations. There are already tens of thousands of products available that are organic or non-GMO. Food labeling regulations should be set by the federal level. So, as Dana said, I hope you're enjoying hearing the facts about Measure 92, and I certainly urge you to vote no. Thank you so much.
And I reiterate that thanks to everybody who joined us this evening. Please do, if you want to get more information about the true facts about Measure 92, please visit factsabout92.com or vote no on 92.com to get more information. We also remind you to please mail in your ballots as soon as possible. And also, if you had a question that was not answered or you'd like to leave a comment, there'll be an opportunity to do so at the end of this phone call. So thank you again for joining us on the Measure 92 Town Hall, and please vote no on Measure 92. Thank you so much.